In the year 2000, two men walked into Blockbuster's headquarters in Dallas, Texas. They had a proposal. They wanted Blockbuster to buy their small DVD by mail company, a startup called Netflix, for just $50 million. The Blockbuster executives listened, then they laughed, and then they showed them the door. 10 years later, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy, owing nearly $1 billion in debt. Netflix, meanwhile, was on its way to becoming one of the most powerful entertainment companies on the planet. This is the story of how one company refused to see the future and paid everything for it. If you're new here, welcome. Deal English is where you learn the language of business through the real stories behind the world's biggest companies, deals, and collapses. Subscribe before we begin. And stay until the end, because every video closes with the vocabulary that will make you sound like you belong in any boardroom in the world. To understand why Blockbuster failed, you first need to understand how dominant it was. At its peak in 2004, Blockbuster operated over 9,000 stores across the United States. It employed 60,000 people. Families planned their Friday nights around it. You'd walk in, browse the shelves, pick a movie, and pay a rental fee, usually around $4. It was a machine, a highly profitable, perfectly optimized machine. But here's the thing about machines. They're built for the world as it is, not the world as it's becoming. And Blockbuster's machine had one very ugly gear hidden inside it: late fees. If you returned your movie even one day after the due date, Blockbuster charged you extra. Some customers paid more in late fees than they had paid for the rental itself. In 1999, Blockbuster collected over $800 million in late fee revenue. That's not a side income. That's a core part of the business model. The company was, in a very real sense, financially dependent on annoying its own customers. That detail matters. Remember it. Across the country, in a small office in California, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph were watching Blockbuster, and they saw the late fee problem as an open door. In 1997, they launched Netflix with a simple idea. What if you could rent DVDs by mail, keep them as long as you wanted, and pay one flat monthly fee, with no late fees, ever? That monthly flat fee is what we call a subscription model, a business structure where customers pay a regular, fixed amount instead of paying each time they use a service. Think of it like a gym membership versus paying for each individual workout class. At first, Netflix was small, very small. They had about 300,000 subscribers in 2000, compared to Blockbuster's 60 million customers. Their burn rate, the speed at which they were spending investor money before becoming profitable, was dangerously high. They were losing money fast, and they knew it. That's why Hastings and Randolph flew to Dallas. They needed Blockbuster's money and their distribution network. They were, by their own admission, in a fragile position. But here's what they also had: a fundamentally better offer for the customer. No late fees, no driving to a store, DVDs delivered directly to your door. The details of what happened in that Dallas boardroom in 2000 have become the stuff of business legend. The Blockbuster executives, led at the time by CEO John Antioco, reportedly found the meeting almost amusing. Netflix was a niche product for internet enthusiasts. Their model only worked for people with patience, people who planned ahead. Walk-in customers who decided on Friday evening that they wanted a movie tonight? Netflix couldn't help them. There was logic to Blockbuster's position. We should be fair about that. But there was also arrogance. The executives saw their 9,000 stores, their 60 million customers, their hundreds of millions in revenue, and they could not imagine that any of it was at risk. This is a pattern you will see again and again in business history. The market leader looks at a small competitor and sees only what that competitor cannot do. It cannot match our scale. It cannot serve our core customer. It is not a threat. What they miss is the direction of travel. Netflix couldn't do many things Blockbuster could, but every month it could do a little more. And crucially, it was building habits. Subscribers who joined in 2000 were learning a new behavior: choosing films online, waiting for delivery, planning ahead, They were becoming comfortable with a different way of consuming entertainment. Blockbuster walked away from that meeting, having paid nothing, acquired nothing, and learned nothing. Between 2000 and 2004, Netflix grew steadily. It began to eat into Blockbuster's market share, the percentage of total customers in the video rental industry that Blockbuster controlled. Not dramatically, not overnight, slowly. Inside Blockbuster, some people noticed. A few executives pushed for the company to launch its own subscription service, its own online platform. There was a brief, genuine attempt. A service called Blockbuster Online, launched in 2004, which actually outperformed Netflix on some metrics. For one short moment, it looked like Blockbuster might pivot, a business term for changing your strategy significantly in response to new conditions, rather than continuing on the same path. A pivot is not a failure. In fact, the companies that survive disruption almost always pivot before it's too late. But Blockbuster's pivot stalled. Why? Because the late fee revenue stream was so large, so deeply embedded in the financial structure of the company, that the board of directors could not bring themselves to cut it. They were protecting today's income at the cost of tomorrow's survival. In 2005, activist investors replaced CEO Antioco, who had been pushing for change, with a more conservative leader. The online strategy was scaled back. Late fees were quietly reintroduced. And Netflix, meanwhile, was negotiating licensing deals, legal agreements that gave them the right to stream content from film studios directly over the internet. While Blockbuster was defending its stores, Netflix was building the infrastructure of a completely different industry. By 2007, Netflix launched its streaming service. No DVDs, no waiting, no delivery, instant access to thousands of films and television shows for one monthly fee on any screen you owned. This was the moment the game changed completely. Not because streaming was new, several companies had tried it, but because Netflix had spent 7 years building subscriber trust, brand recognition, and a content library large enough to make it feel worth paying for. Blockbuster was now a late adopter, a person or company that accepts and uses a new technology or idea only after it has already become mainstream. There is nothing inherently wrong with being cautious about new technology. But when your entire industry is being restructured around that technology, being a late adopter isn't caution. It's a sentence. The numbers tell the story simply. In 2005, Blockbuster had a market share of roughly 40% of the home video rental industry. By 2010, that number was collapsing. Customers were leaving, not in a trickle, but in a flood. The term for what Netflix did to Blockbuster is disruption. When a new product, service, or business model fundamentally changes an existing industry, often making older companies obsolete. The writer Clayton Christensen, who studied this pattern deeply, noted that disruption almost never happens all at once. It starts at the edges, in markets the established players don't care about, with customers the big companies don't value. Then, gradually, it moves to the center. Disruption happens slowly, then all at once. In September 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. The formal legal process through which a company or individual declares they cannot repay their debts and asks a court to help manage or dissolve their financial obligations. It listed nearly $1 billion in liabilities. The last corporate-owned Blockbuster store in the United States closed in 2013. There is one single franchise location still open today in Bend, Oregon, kept alive more as a cultural monument than a functioning business. So what do we take from this story? Blockbuster did not fail because it was run by stupid people. It failed because it was run by rational people making rational decisions, optimizing for the world they understood, rather than preparing for the world that was arriving. The late fees weren't a mistake. They were genuinely profitable. The skepticism about Netflix in 2000 wasn't entirely unreasonable. Streaming in 2004 was genuinely not ready. But every one of those reasonable decisions compounded year after year into an inability to change. The lesson for businesses and for professionals is this: the skills and strategies that make you successful in a stable market can become the very things that make you vulnerable when the market shifts. Being aware of disruption doesn't protect you from it. Being willing to act before the numbers force you to. That's what separates the companies that survive from the ones that end up in the history books. Coming up, your vocabulary card for episode 1. Here are the 8 business English terms from today's episode. Disruption. When a new product or business model fundamentally changes an industry, making established companies struggle to compete. Pivot. A significant change in a company's strategy or direction, usually made in response to new market conditions or challenges. Late adopter. A person or organization that starts using a new technology or idea only after it has already become widely accepted by others. Market share. The percentage of total sales or customers in a specific industry that one company controls. Bankruptcy. The legal process through which a person or company that cannot repay its debts asks a court to help manage or dissolve those financial obligations. Subscription model. A business structure in which customers pay a regular fixed fee, usually monthly or annually, in exchange for continued access to a product or service. Burn rate. The speed at which a company spends its available cash, especially before it becomes profitable. A key concern for startups. Licensing. A legal agreement in which one company pays another for the right to use its content, technology, or intellectual property. That's episode 1 of Deal English. If any of these terms came up in your own professional life this week, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear how you use them. See you next episode.